Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Miriam Dant, and it is my honor to serve as the board president for the Indianapolis Jewish Community Relations Council and to welcome you tonight to our community briefing with Aviv Ezra, the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest. Thank you to the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis for so eagerly accepting our invitation to host JCRC as a partner for their ongoing community briefing programs. Tonight's conversation is the latest in several community updates that Federation has provided since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This series allows our Jewish community to learn from other members of the Jewish community, as well as for our national and international partners to provide their expertise about pressing issues. The Jewish Community Relations Council has a long history of engaging and partnering with the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest. Over the years, we have hosted several community conversations with their office, including a week in 2019 during which Indianapolis was designated as a pop-up consulate. We've worked together to educate Hoosier business leaders, civic leaders, and elected officials about Israel and the benefits of state-to-state partnerships, and we've worked with their academic affairs department to ensure that universities and educational institutions remain beacons of academic freedom. Currently, during COVID-19, the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest and the Indianapolis JCRC work closely together to amplify each other's work across Indiana through close coordination between our two communications staffs. I'd like to take a minute to share a bit about our JCRC. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization created in 1942 by the Jewish community in Indianapolis to serve as the official liaison between our Jewish community and the community at large. We maintain the communal table around which Jewish organizations, agencies, and synagogues are invited to sit together to determine the consensus positions and collective concerns that represent the broadest swath of the Jewish community. Our lay leaders, many of whom are with us this evening, along with our professional staff, are then tasked with communicating those interests to policymakers and civic leaders. One of our primary missions is to advocate for a secure and democratic state of Israel. We do this locally by encouraging people to visit Israel, and even by taking them to Israel ourselves. Since the mid-1980s, with support from the Jewish Federation and the Maurer family, JCRC has taken nearly 150 Central Indiana civic leaders to Israel. We also support efforts that strengthen the relationship between the state of Indiana and the state of Israel. And you'll hear about some of the exciting things happening between Indiana and Israel during tonight's program. Before we get into the bulk of the program, it is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Bukai, who directs the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis's Israel and Overseas Department. Michelle is going to share with you how our partnership with the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest provides us with opportunities for people-to-people relationship building. Michelle?
Thank you, Miriam. Good evening. I'm Michelle Bukai, the Israel and Overseas Director at the Jewish Federation. For more than 100 years, the Federation has been working with important historic partners, such as the Jewish Agency for Israel and the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, among others, to support Israel and Jewish communities in need around the world. These efforts help connect Hoosiers to their global Jewish family and give the opportunity to assist where and when needed. Indianapolis takes part in the Jewish Agency's flagship program of Shlichim, young Israeli emissaries that come to Indiana for a year or two and bring Israeli culture, history, cuisine, music, and more into our homes. These emissaries receive assistance, guidance, and resources from the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest. Working in collaboration with the Israel Consulate, the emissaries also assist Jewish Hoosiers who want to make Aliyah, to emigrate to Israel under the law of return. Two annual programs that the Jewish Federation organizes are large community celebrations and commemorations for Israel's Independence Day, Yom HaAtzmaut, and Yom HaZikaron, Israel's very solemn Memorial Day. We appreciate the Israel Consulate's presence in these events by sending representatives of the consulate to participate and the financial support we've received in the past to help run these programs. Every winter, the Jewish community participates in the Indianapolis International Festival that attracts some 30,000 people from all over Indiana and neighboring states. Schools send their classes to spend hours at the festival, where their students learn about countries around the world. For many folks attending the International Festival, it's the first time that they hear about Israel. And interestingly, for some, it's the first time that they meet someone Jewish. The Israel Consulate has assisted with resources and sending a representative to help run the Israel booth, together with our volunteers and our Israeli emissary. Lastly, the Jewish Federation, in collaboration with the Jewish Community Relations Council and the JCC, organize an annual Jewish and Israeli film festival every summer. This is an opportunity for Hoosiers to learn about Israeli and Jewish culture, history, and more through documentaries and entertaining films. Thanks to the Israeli Consulate, we've hosted speakers who broadened the information related to films that were screened. Thank you, Aviv, and the Consulate General of Israel for many years of collaboration and support. I would now like to introduce Lindsay Mintz, Executive Director of the Indianapolis Jewish Communities Relations Council, who will be discussing a JCRC Israel Fellowship Program and introducing tonight's presenter, Aviv Ezra, and tonight's moderator, Brian Hoffman. Thank you.
Lindsay, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, that's a little embarrassing 8 months into this. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lindsay Mintz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Indianapolis Jewish Community. Thank you, Miriam and Michelle and Federation team for hosting us and Consul General Ezra tonight. Before I introduce our Consul General and our moderator, Brian Hoffman, I want to just take a quick moment to thank someone who's not on this call. Daniel Ashheim is a new ambassador in the Midwest Consulate. He's the Consul for Public Diplomacy, and right now he is speaking to the JCRC's Israel Engagement Fellows. We have a group of 14 incredible young Jewish leaders who took it upon themselves to dedicate 10 Mondays this fall to do a deep dive learning about Israel, Zionism, Jewish history, and anti-Semitism. They've looked at how Israel's treated in the media and how they want to learn to articulate their Jewish identity and pro-Israel identity, and how they're going to be advocates on their future college campus. And we were really thrilled that tonight we could have both Aviv Ezra with us for this community briefing, but also Daniel speaking to our Jewish team. So thanks to Daniel for playing that role. And before I introduce Consul General Ezra, I just want to let everybody know, following his remarks, we have Brian Hoffman, who is going to be moderating and managing our Q&A. So I'll just tell you real quickly about Brian. It might be the first time some of you are meeting him virtually. Brian grew up in Dallas, but is now thankfully a member of our local Jewish community here in Indianapolis. He works for Zeta Beta Tau fraternity, the foundation part of the fraternity, managing community engagement and donor cultivation. Brian has a master's in higher education administration from Florida State University and a degree in philosophy from Tulane. He's an alum of ADL's Glass Leadership Institute, gives presentations on a range of social justice issues, and was recently married in the midst of COVID. So a mazel tov, Brian, from the Jewish community to you on your recent marriage, and thank you for moderating the Q&A following Aviv's remarks. Okay, so I'm so excited that we get to hear from our Consul General Aviv Ezra tonight. Our Midwest region has been lucky enough to have this advocate, passionate ambassador serving the Midwest region for almost 4 years now. He's based out of Chicago and is the official representative of the state of Indiana to 9 states, which includes Indiana, thankfully. Consul General Aviv Ezra joined Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1999, and over the past 20 years has held several impressive posts around the world, including as economic and commercial attaché in Cairo, Egypt. Since he's been stateside, he has really played significant roles in both DC and in the Atlanta Consulate. In DC, he really helped quarterback the relationship between Israel and the United States Congress, served as Director of Congressional Affairs, as Counselor for Congressional Affairs at the Embassy in DC, and as I mentioned, also as a Deputy Consul General in the Southeastern region in Atlanta. During his service with the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, he earned the rank of captain, and following his military service, Aviv earned a BA in economics and political science from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He is married to Einat and has 3 children whom he manages to tuck into bed every night. And so I'm really thrilled to welcome Consul General Ezra. He's going to be speaking on several topics: the impact of the Abraham Accords, the U.S.-Israel relationship post-2020 election, and what's new on the Indiana-Israel economic front. A quick reminder to everyone that as questions come to mind, go ahead and suggest them in our Q&A, and we will start collecting those and make sure Brian has them at his disposal when he starts to moderate. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and especially to Consul General Ezra for speaking to Hoosiers across our great state of Indiana. The virtual floor is yours.
Shalom, everybody. And as you said, Lindsay, this is fascinating that after 8 months, we still need to play around with these buttons to make sure that we are heard. I hope everybody can hear me over there. And obviously, one of the silver linings of this horrible pandemic is that we have the ability to see so many of you through this mechanism of Zoom or any other technical platform, and to be able to really reconnect as much as we can across the entire Midwest. And for us, this is something which is crucial. I want to first begin by thanking the JCRC and thanking the Federation, and very specifically thanking Miriam and Michelle, and you specifically, Lindsay, and your amazing team for the continuous partnership, for the connectivity between our consulate and between the state of Israel and the people of Israel, between the ongoing delegation and the advocacy, unbelievable relationship that we will not and are not taking for granted. And most importantly, the fact that you guys are continuing such an amazing continuity to the chain with education to the next link and the next ring of legacy of Zionism to your children and to your children's children, which is something I think that poses the biggest challenge today for all of us. So I want to thank the JCRC, thank the Federation, and thank the community at large for this ongoing relationship. I think that we'll open with a few words that I've prepared in a kind of a short briefing or presentation, and then later on I look forward to the Q&A with Brian and with all of the friends that are around the table tonight. And I will begin by, as you mentioned, Lindsay, saying a few words about who we are as the consulate and what are we doing here, and our relationship, of course, with the Midwest and India specifically. Our consulate, as many of you know, is a regional embassy of Israel to the Midwestern United States. We have 8 consulates on top of the embassy in Washington, D.C., and the idea is to connect Israel on the basic state level and not necessarily just on the federal level, because we believe that the connectivity through the local elected officials and through the people-to-people kind of an angle is superbly important. While it's important to be in the Beltway in Washington, D.C., and as you mentioned, Lindsay, I did that for about 4 years in Washington as the Israel's liaison to the US Congress, I think it's crucial to be able to move outside of the Beltway and really touch base with real America. And what's more real America than the Midwest? I think you've heard me, some of you have heard me talk about it relentlessly, that Israelis and other foreigners that are not Americans think that America is just the coasts. But we believe that America lies right here in the Midwest, and everything that works and ticks comes from here. And as much as I'm working on branding Israel in the Midwest, I'm also taking it upon my responsibility to brand the Midwest back in Israel. I have an amazing team with me here, which is relatively a large team considering other Israeli consulates and embassies. We have 5 diplomats here. One of them is dealing with the consular services and the administration. But on top of that, we have 3 political diplomats, and of course, a diplomat that deals with the security elements of the consulate. But 3 political elements and political diplomats. You mentioned Consul Daniel Ashheim, which just arrived a couple of months ago, and he's our Consul for Public Diplomacy and our spokesperson. And we have our Consul for Community Affairs and Economic Development, Ariel Arada, and myself leading the mission with a group of about 20 staff members. And our goal is to reach out to the entire Midwest. So we cover 9 states, almost 20% of the United States, all the way from Michigan to the Dakotas, including Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, obviously Illinois, and most importantly, the Hoosiers. And we are intensively working on various topic of activities. First, I think, and which is very, very important for us, and maybe due to my background, is something that I put a major emphasis on, which is the political cooperation. I have tried in the last 4 years to reach out to all level of elected officials, from governors, members of Congress, US senators, state legislators, mayors, and other elected officials like lieutenant governors and attorney generals, etc. One of my pride of this last 3 and something years that we have brought almost 6 of the 9 governors on official trips to Israel. Each one of them came with a huge delegation of about 30, 40, 50 members of the either business community or academic community. And I'm very proud to be able to have joined most of these trips, including first and foremost, the governor of the great state of Indiana, Governor Eric Holcomb. On top of that, our second major goal is to enhance economic cooperation. And we believe that this is of an essence, because when I speak with these governors and elected officials, as much as they are very supportive of the US-Israel bond on the strategic level, they're very interested in what and how can we work together in joint investments, in foreign direct investment, in economic cooperation. And we have worked dramatically on enhancing that on the business-to-business level, but also on the economic developments of the states. And we can maybe elaborate about that also. One of our claims to fame that we are very, very proud of is the fact that after more than 15 years, finally, we have managed, even with the pandemic, to connect Israel and the Midwest with a non-stop flight from Israel to O'Hare, 3 hours from Indianapolis. So now it's much easier. You can have your breakfast in Indy and have your dinner in Jerusalem after 2 maybe short movies and 1 slightly lousy kosher dinner, but you can make it in 10 hours to Israel. And I think that would be a game changer for all of you, and you're definitely invited to utilize that. It is by United, and it's a 3 times a week flight. On top of the political and economic cooperation, we are working intensively on reaching out to the communities here, various communities, from the African American community to the evangelical community to the Hindu community and many others of communities that are spread around the Midwest. One of the ideas is to find certain projects that lie perfectly with challenges that are here, and to bring what Israel has as a relative advantage to the table. We have done that with a very troubled neighborhood here in in the south side of Chicago. And we brought an Israeli model that deals with trauma. It's called Natal. And unfortunately, Israel has experience in dealing with trauma because of the terror attacks. And we have applied that to the certain trauma implications that people suffer here from gun violence. And this has tracked a lot of attention. And I highly recommend you to Google it and look at it and see. We wrote a few articles about it. And that takes me to the last and not least, which is the Media Corporation. I'm very proud of almost 25 op-eds that we have published in the local, and not in the local, in the major media newspapers here in the Midwest, various topics from geopolitical to local cooperation. And I highly recommend all of you, and we could share all these 25 op-eds with you, Lindsay, and you could maybe share to the group later on, or maybe I can ask Ron to possibly put some of those during my short presentation here, including the last week's op-ed, as somebody just mentioned here about when does anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism. And I think this is a very interesting challenge that we're facing now. Maybe I can relate to it also later on. So with no further ado, I just want to say that when it comes to the Consulate, we're very active on all social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever these young kids like to chat with. And we are very transparent on many of the things that we do. So I invite you to follow us on these platforms, and we'll be more than happy to communicate back and forth. So let me just dive into a few of the topics that we've discussed. This is obviously a very challenging period of time for everybody because of the global pandemic or because of COVID-19. I'm sure many of you are following the situation in Israel. We unfortunately had a second spike, which we had to deal once again with a certain kind of a lockdown, which in return brought down the numbers once again. And again, once you open the economy, once you open the education system, numbers will begin spiking back. We are obviously working, as I'm sure many of you know, in developing also a vaccine that we hope to be able to be ready in the summer of 21. Obviously, we have signed a few of the agreements with both Moderna and Pfizer and the British vaccine to be able to bring some of the vaccines to Israel. And on the other hand, we're working closely with many of the companies here to try to assist as much as we can, because the challenge is obviously a global challenge. But among this hectic and challenging period of time, I think there's some good news. And I hate to be the bearer of good news from the Middle East, but one of those good news is a set of 3 peace accords, normalization accords that we have been honored to be able to sign just recently with the auspices of the United States. And this is with the Abraham Accords being signed with the UAE, with Bahrain, and recently beginning of a similar kind of process with Sudan. Now, let me say a few words about the Abraham Accord, and really, I mean, I'm going to touch it very shortly. Maybe if there's an interest, we can dive into it later on in the Q&A. But I think the major few points are the following. First of all, there's a major change in narrative. For many years, we've been told that without any movement with the Palestinians, there will be no movement with the Arab world in terms of peace. And in a sense, the Palestinians have held the entire peace process hostage, because they would be able to press the button and say, without the Israelis' concessions and giving in on all of our demands, we will never give a green light to the Arab world to move forward. And I have attended many of these meetings in the last 10 years during my work with Congress at the Prime Minister's office with the Prime Minister. And I've heard him talk about it many times, multiple times, that he believes that changing the narrative from the thought that you should begin first with the Palestinians and then go to the Arab world, and just twist it and say, let's begin with the Arab world, which will send a message to the Palestinians that they should join in and not be late for the train that will be leaving the station. And this is exactly what happened. mean, you can have a lot of criticism towards Netanyahu, etc., but you should give the credit here because I heard him say that to senators. That, by the way, many of them didn't believe that this is doable, but 10 years ago, saying that this is happening and it should happen, and we've seen that happening beneath the surface for many years. Our foreign ministry was involved. We can tell you now that we had representatives, unofficial representatives, both in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, in Manama, and many other places. But finally, the fact that we changed the narrative and had these countries move forward, I think is crucial to the understanding of why this movement is so important. Second, I think it's pretty clear that the peace accord here is actually dominated and incentivized by the fact that we have a common enemy, which is Iran. Iran, as a leader of proliferation of terror, proliferations of arms, working on bringing proxies against Israel, and most importantly, developing a nuclear program, is a challenge that is not only threatening Israel, but rather threatening not only the entire world, but also the GCC countries, which are not only alarmed, but panicked by the Iranians' goals of proliferation and exporting the revolution. And in a sense, the fact that we had a common enemy, or as you say in our neck of the woods, the enemy of your enemy is your friend, I think also drove these countries to understand that Israel is not their enemy anymore, but rather a partner against this radical regime coming from Tehran. Thirdly, I think the fact that they have moved forward is a major, major push towards the Palestinians to understand that they should jump on the wagon sooner rather than later. Look, they're not going to get 100. We're not going to get 100% of what we want. They're not going to get 100% of what they want, but they need to come to the negotiation table because this is the only way that you're going to be achieving the deal. And we think this Abraham Accord will send a message to the Palestinians that they are becoming, how can we say, very, very old timers. And the fact that they keep missing an opportunity, like Abba Evans said in the past, is really not playing in their benefit, and time is not playing in their benefit. Fourth point is that as opposed to the peace accords with Egypt and Jordan, which are mostly lack of war, and I served in Egypt, there is no people-to-people real dramatic relationship. This is an economic peace. This is an economic piece of exchange of foreign direct investments, of tourism, medical help. And we actually at the Foreign Ministry, and specifically at our consulate, are going to be conducting this month an event, a business-to-business event, a trilateral cooperation between Israel, UAE, and the Midwest. How can we work together? This is happening December 17th. And maybe Ron, you could put some details in the chat here and invite all of the friends around this table. And if not, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll send you an invitation to this upcoming Zoom event. Two last remarks about the Abraham Accord. One, we need to give a lot of credit for the U.S. administration. Again, one could be very critical of the current administration on many things, and that's not for me to say. I'm a foreign diplomat, but I have to give credit where credit is due. This administration's leadership was crucial to push these countries to come to the negotiation table and to really sign this accord, and it shows that it's doable. Certain administration we had many years of no progress, and certain administrations we had signing of three, not one, not two, three accords. So I think this is crucial for us as diplomats to understand that certain tactics and certain strategies can make a difference. And hopefully this is a lesson learned to many others across the relationship. One last remark is that we believe that there are more in the pipeline. And some of you have heard, I think, the recent reports about a visit by our prime minister to a certain other country in the region. We hope that the pipeline will continue to flow and will bring more and more barriers of more and more good news coming from the Mid East to the Midwest. I want to say a word about the bilateral relationship here with the United States. You guys have gone through a very intense, I think that's the understatement of the year, intense cycle of elections. I've been doing American politics for many years, and I have to tell you that obviously you know that better than I, that the hyper-partisan nature of the political platforms are not playing in favor of the United States, but most importantly, not playing in favor of the relationship with Israel, because Israel was always based on two major echelons. One is the fact that the relationship is based on a bipartisan nature, and the second is that the support for the US-Israel bond is transcending administration. Now, don't get me wrong. We did have challenges. We had challenges with Democratic presidents, president of Democrats, and Republican presidents. Many of you remember also the days of Jim Baker and George Bush the father. And we also remember certain challenges, certainly on the Iranian issue with President Obama's administration. But we all know that the support for a strong enhancement of the US-Israel relationship is based on three things: shared values, shared interests, and the shared support. And the third is shared support from the constituents. So a very strong public opinion that is supporting the relationship and the enhancement of the relationship. And I think this is something that we should all be focused on. The incoming administration, we know very well. First of all, we know President-elect Biden very well for 47 years, as opposed to Obama at the time, who was a state senator. President-elect Obama, we know his voting records on Israel, his support for Zionism, his love for Zionism, his relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu and many other figures in Israel. We know many of the other players that are surrounding him, and we know the incoming Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who is a very good friend. And I think all in all, we are very confident of the ongoing support and relationship. That being said, that does not mean that we're going to have 100% sync of all the topics. And sometimes in Mishpucha, you have some disagreements, but I think it's important to A, be transparent about them, and B, not being public about it, but rather making sure that you can work together, and C, also not to surprise each other. I think these are three good rules for interaction between the two sides. I want to move forward because I don't want to, it's dangerous, Lindsay, when you give an Israeli diplomat the microphone. You could, I got captive audience here, right? You guys cannot go anywhere, right? So, however, I do want to be short so I can open it for some questions and answer. And I want to focus, lastly, maybe on the relationship that we have with the superb state that you guys live in, the state of Indiana. I think, truthfully, I think that it's really a role model for Israel and the foreign ministry for an Israel-state relationship. It began for me with a superb relationship with Governor Holcomb. When I met him for the first time was about 3.5, 4 years ago. Brian, do I have a few more minutes or is it? Yeah, okay, good. I met him about 3.5 years ago, and one of the things that I told him, he said, he talked about his love for Israel and about the relationship, and he said, I have my predecessor who is a good friend of Israel. What can we do for you? And I said to him, look, one of the great things that you could do is finally maybe move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So the governor said, "Oh, that's a great idea." And I said to him, "You know what, Governor? And I'll throw an incentive because I said to myself, so many years, 70 years, the embassy didn't move. I'm going to throw an incentive. If you move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, I'll move my consulate from Chicago to Indianapolis." Couple of months later, after the president announced of the movement of the embassy, I get this phone call on my cell phone. Mr. Consul General, this is the governor of Indiana calling to collect. So I told him, look, it took you about 70 something years. I hopefully will be doing it in a shorter period of time. But we got a great consulate in Chicago, and I think we're going to have a superb consulate in Indy. And as Lindsay mentioned, We did a project last year, which is unprecedented in terms of other consulates. We moved the consulate for a few days in what we call the pop-up consulate. And I think we had a superb work with the JCRC and with the Federation and with the governor, with the mayor, with the speaker, and many others. And in that capacity, really, I want to say, look, on top of the governor, I had a great relationship with the previous speaker. He invited me actually to speak on the floor. I spoke on the floor of the House of Representatives on behalf of Israel. And later on, obviously, a great relationship with the mayor of Indianapolis. And I think we're working with the JCRC and with the Federation to sign a sister city with Israel. Worked very closely with his deputy, which we brought to Israel. And I think she came back overwhelmed by what she saw. We have a great relationship on the level of the National Guard. And we have 3 MOUs that are signed between the Israeli Home Front Command and National Guards in the United States. One of them is with Indiana. So we're very proud of that, and many joint drills and joint contributions. We have a superb economic cooperation relationship. Your Secretary of Commerce, Jim Challenger, who is really a personal friend, what a superb guy, works to enhance the foreign direct investments into Indy and enhancing the jobs opportunity in Indiana. But he knows how to do it in such a graceful manner that creates the win-win situation. Numerous trade delegations to Israel headed by him, and as I said, the governor, but also by many others, yielded real tangible fruits like the cyber technology conference that we have had twice in the last 3 years in Indianapolis. The third one was supposed to happen this year, but due to COVID, it was postponed. But it was focused on cyber. A signing of an agreement between Israel and Indiana with the Israeli Innovation Authority, and many more tangible, quantifiable, so that you can quantify achievement that we're very proud of. And in return, of course, we of course invested a lot of time in making sure that Indiana is on the decision makers in Israel's mind. And one of the things that I'm very proud of is that we have brought an unprecedented visit, I think 2 years ago, by the Israeli Minister of Agriculture. I think an unprecedented visit, maybe Lindsay can correct me, and had a superb visit, and I think began another great relationship with many companies. And one last thing, in terms of really expressing our appreciation, I loved it when a couple of months ago I got this text and actually a phone call from the Governor Holcomb, that told me, "Hey, I'm driving in Indianapolis now, and I'm seeing this huge billboard, and that billboard in the middle of Indianapolis says Israel stands with Indy. Israel loves Indianapolis." And he was really, yes, that's the billboard. Kind of a small token of appreciation. I think at that time it was when numbers spiked, and we wanted to put it in everybody's face to make it clear that Israel will always be with Indiana at any given time. So let me just stop here for a second, and we could open it to Q&A. I do want to end by saying that, you know, I described so many great achievements and opportunities, but I have to say that we are still dealing with certain challenges that many of you are familiar with, including the rise of anti-Semitism. And I had the opportunity, of course, of visiting, unfortunately, a synagogue in Carmel, Indiana. I think synagogue Sharei Tfilah, that was desecrated at a certain kind of point, and we had the opportunity of coming to the synagogue itself and expressing our support, and of course mentioning that this is unacceptable and should not happen. But it is. We can't hide under the slogan of the innocence of the ignorance. It's there, and we should make sure that it will be clear and legislated and enforced that this is unacceptable, certainly not in the land of the free and in the home of the braves. And last but not least, we do have the challenge of, I would say, nothing more than hypocriticism coming from certain elements of radical elements that support boycotting and divesting and sanctioning Israel. We know that this movement is anti-Semitic, and the easiest way to prove it is that if those radical elements believe that they want to boycott a certain kind of a country because of a certain policy, then the question that I will pose to them is, what number is Israel on your list? So you could decide that you want to go against many countries like, I don't know, Turkey, which is occupying Cyprus, or China, which is occupying Tibet, or Russia, which is occupying other elements. And then that will be fine and dandy. I will be able to advocate that Israel is not part of these lists and that we are not occupying a land which is ours and that we are indigenous to. But I can respect that you have a principle. But if your list consists of only one country, which is the country of the Jewish people, and no other countries in that list, then that ideology has a different name. It's called anti-Semitism, and it's unacceptable in America. So I will stop here, and I think that we can open it maybe to some questions and answers, because I got a lot more to talk about, but I think we should maybe see if we have some Q&A.
For sure. Well, thank you, Aviv. We really appreciate all of your updates on a number of fronts here. So I'll kick it off with one of your favorite topics to talk about, the economic relationship that we have. And we got a lot of questions about how we, sure in the Midwest overall, but here in Indiana, as you were talking about being an example, how can we help, or how are we helping you achieve those goals of building those economic bridges?
Thank you. Yes, it's definitely a strong topic on our agenda. First of all, I want to say what we have done from our side. I have designated one of our diplomats, as I said, Consul Ariela Rada, to focus mostly on economic cooperation. She, on top of that, has received something that we don't have at this point too widely, and that means that we're investing human resources and budget for that goal. The goal starts with the fact that we believe that the region as a whole, and specifically Indiana, has a huge potential to much more than what we have at the moment. Now, how do I see it? I see it because the majority of the focus, as I said, is usually drawn to the Silicon Valley on the West Coast or to New York and the East Coast. But there's a lack of understanding in Israel in regards to what we can do here as a state in terms of economic development, and as a level of a business to business in terms of companies. There are certain sectors that we're focused on. We're focused on ag tech. We're over here in Indiana, ag tech, water tech, and cyber tech. But there are many other opportunities, including telecommunications, IT, artificial intelligence, and many more. I think we did not scratch yet the surface of the potential. And one of the best tools for us to really make, again, we don't see ourselves as professionals when it comes to business matchmaking. But what we do know is that we are very good in connecting the dots. So we don't necessarily know to dive into the specifics of the products, but we know how to connect the dots. And the best platform that we have found in Indiana is a very useful and a very productive and effective state platform, which, as I said, mentioned again, the Secretary of Commerce, Jim Challenger, who specifically and personally is involved in the relationship with Israel, because he has come to Israel, he has visited Israel many times, and he has seen the potential firsthand, and he understands that he's not only willing to talk the talk, but also walk the walk in investing time, energy, and budget. And he's doing that, for example, with an MOU that has been signed in connecting companies in R&D, research and development in certain topics between Indiana and Israel, whereas the R&D budget could come half from Israel and half from Indiana. So if Ron would like, we can maybe attach the MOU or at least some details about the MOU here in the chat. And if we have companies from Indiana that are willing to apply with an Israeli company for those grants, we definitely, as Israel and Indiana state level, are willing to invest the money for them to really kickstart their cooperation.
Great, that's great, thank you. Along the lines of economics, travel, we know right now things are a challenge with COVID, which I'll get to in a second, but just kind of curious what your relationship was like with El Al and what it took to get us that nonstop flight in the region from O'Hare.
You know, when I came here for the first time to the Midwest, to my posting here, actually a couple of months before, I had to connect in Vienna. And about 2 hours before, about an hour before the connecting flight was supposed to take off, they came out with a message saying that there's a problem. I don't know what the problem was, but then we had to connect through Miami. So I flew from Tel Aviv to Vienna, Vienna, Miami, Miami, Chicago. That's where I vowed that I'm going to be making sure that when I finish my assignment here, it's going to be a short 10 hours or 11 hours flight from the Midwest to Israel, because I believe it's a game changer. And seriously speaking, when you talk to business counterparts, companies, or investors, when they tell you, hey, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to come, even though there's a lot of opportunities, because it's shorter for me to fly from Israel to the West Coast than from Israel to the Midwest, I understood that we really need to solve this technical barrier. You know, it may not sound a dramatic content-oriented barrier, but this technical barrier plays a major role. So we did put it high on our agenda. And to be frank, I have invested a lot of time to get El Al to fly to O'Hare nonstop. And we actually succeeded. And there was even a date. The date was March 23rd, 2020. But unfortunately, as you know today, looking back, that once the pandemic hit, El Al and the aviation industry as a whole, but El Al specifically was hit very hard, and they had to cancel many of their routes. Actually, they just stopped flying. So we had to shift gear and see how we can make it happen. And I'm very glad to report that United has jumped in and said, this is a great line with great potential. And I hope that obviously the numbers are now very low because of the lockdown in Israel and the quarantine that is requested on both sides. But at this point of time, they're continuing the flight. They're not discontinuing it. And I really, really hope that COVID permitting, we will not lose this legacy item that I'm very proud of. It's not that I'm getting any raises on that from the foreign ministry, but I love to hear the smiles. I love to see the smiles coming from my friends here, and I'm very proud of this.
Absolutely. So, thinking along those lines.
By the way, the aviation industry is one thing, but getting married under COVID, this is another kind of level of courage. So congratulations, Mazel Tov, and thank you for leading the way and showing courage during pandemic.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It was certainly a challenge. We made a lot of adjustments, but all good, happy and healthy.
Good.
So you had talked earlier about the 3 important things to share: shared values, shared interest, and shared support between administrations, regardless of who's in charge here, regardless of who's in charge in Israel. With the incoming administration, are there things that you want to accomplish or things that you have in mind that hopefully can happen?
Look, first of all, these three elements are very nicely crafted. Somebody showed it to me under VIP, values, interest, and people. So Israel is a VIP here in America because of these three elements of values, interest, and people, meaning the support coming from the constituent. I actually called it VIC, but my colleague used the VIP. I think it's a better kind of a slogan. Look, I want to be frank. We're among friends, and it's very well known that we had some disagreements when it comes to tactics about achieving a certain goal vis-a-vis Iran mostly. And I think that the previous Democratic administration, President Obama's administration, I think their goal was the same goal as the Israel's and the GCC countries and many Arab worlds, including Egypt and Jordan, which is to prevent Iran from going nuclear. But we differed. We had differences in tactics. Whereas we thought that we should not, in any way, shape, or form, negotiate with the Iranians and show them a very strong hand, the Obama administration thought differently and pushed towards a certain kind of a process. And we're all familiar with how it ended vis-a-vis the JCPOA. And our prime minister was very clear about what we think about it. And I think that all in all, it was pretty clear that on the tactics, there were major differences. We hope that with the incoming administration, we'll be taking into consideration a few things. First of all, that now we are at least 5 years after the JCPOA was signed. And obviously this President Trump has extracted America from this deal because one of the major problems with the deal is the sunset clause, which means that this deal is a periodically limited time of a deal. Previous administration thought that in 10 years there will be changes, but we know now that it's not going to any changes, and we know that after these 10 years they're not going to have any limitation on their nuclear program, which is something that is unacceptable for us in our neck of the woods. Also, we know that the money that they have received was not taken to produce R&D in fighting COVID-19 or cancer, but rather to produce R&D in guided missiles towards attacking Israeli civilians in Haifa or across the entire state of Israel. So, we are entitled to some skepticism when it comes to Iran. Look, we don't want a regime change in Iran. This is not our goal, but we are not willing to take a risk and having a radical regime like that, which is very direct and very clear about their intention with the Jewish states once they have the nuclear capability. They want to wipe us off the map. They're saying it in Hebrew, not in Farsi, not in English. They're writing it on the missiles in Hebrew. So one should give us some benefit of the doubt by saying that we would rather be safe than sorry. And I really care to think that this incoming administration will take that into consideration. We're not against diplomatic means of solving it, but not in a manner that you're kicking the can down the road and saying, hey, you guys are going to be limited for the next 10 years, and then we'll see what happens. 10 years is a pretty short period of time, and people are getting married, people are going to have kids, these kids are going to still be around, and we want to make sure that they're safe. So that is one very, very strong element that we have expectations vis-a-vis the administration. We hope that it will be there. Another second element, which, and again, there are many others, but I want to focus on the second one and then again, not dominate all the conversation, is to say vis-a-vis we discussed this shortly about the Palestinian-Israeli scene. Look, Israel is not perfect. Israel makes mistakes. Israel, we're all familiar with that. But on the other hand, if we're not going to have a peace process in terms of peace negotiation, nothing is going to move. So there was, as I said, a tactic implemented against, or I think focused mostly on pressuring Israel on a certain element. In that case, it was the settlements. And we think that it wasn't very productive because obviously in that 8 years of the previous administration, there was no negotiations at all. So it didn't yield the results. again, we know that we will have to compromise on certain elements, but how about pushing both sides to come to the negotiation tables without conditions? No conditions. Come to the table and then start talking. Then you can have the administration banging the two sides' head and pushing this and pushing that and seeking the equilibrium, because this is how you can give and take certain kind of back and forth and achieving that equilibrium that we're all looking forward to finding for so many decades, for the benefit of the Palestinians too, not just Israelis.
Right. So we have time for one more question. And the last one I want to talk about is kind of what you were just saying and thinking about the future. So it's kind of a two-parter, but what changes have you seen in your time working in the Israeli government? What have you seen with people's or the world's perception of Israel, and where do you see it going in the next 10, 20 years?
So first of all, we are the best democracy, not in the Middle East only, but in the world, because we had already 3 elections in a year and a half's time, and we are continuing that effort in investing in democracy. So you can rest assured that the Israeli democracy is alive and kicking. I mean, look, the truth be told is that if you look at Israel in comparison to Israel that we had, let's say, in the 70s or in the 80s, this is a different Israel altogether because of the economy, because of the high tech, of the telecommunications, IT, cyber, all these corporations that have raised the GDP per capita, lowered the unemployment rate, and created a real oasis in the Middle East. But having said that, A, we have now COVID-19, which will be a game changer across the board for everybody, including for Israel. And B, we're still lacking, I guess, the major point of equilibrium on the geopolitical sphere. And for that, I want to, if this is the last question, to say, maybe to mention what I call the 10 commandments that are crucial for any pro-Israel advocate. First of all, that Israel is the sovereign state of Israel in the land of Israel, not only by might, but by right. And this is important to mention. Second, we should never take Israel for granted. There are still among us people here that remember what can happen when the Jewish people, they don't have a sovereign state of their own. This was not too far ago, right? Thirdly, when we say never again, we don't mean never again that the Holocaust can happen, because we know it can happen again. It happened once, it can happen again. But we mean that never again Israel will be defenseless, or Jews will be defenseless, and Jews will be stateless. Fourthly, if you have children or grandchildren, never assume that your kids know their history. Keep repeating the history. I'm telling it to myself too, and to my kids. It's crucially important. Next, if you lack information, educate yourself. No question is stupid ever. Educate yourself. The Consulate is here. The JCRC is here. Many friends are capable of telling the story. Keep telling the story. It's not just Haggadah Shel Pesach. It's also the story of the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. Next, I think Israel could not and should not ever be a partisan issue in the States. This is crucial. We know, we've seen what happened in Britain, for example. We need to make sure this does not happen here in the States. Next, Israel, as I said, will never be perfect. So will help us make it better, but do it from within. Don't do it outside in an unconstructive manner. And we're willing to receive a lot of help. We need it. Next, I think never be silent, when the Jewish right for sovereignty or the Jewish right for self-defense is attacked. It's very easy to stand aside and to be silent. And it's easier to stay quiet. But we cannot afford it to ourselves, unfortunately. It's pretty clear. And lastly, find your comfort zone of advocacy. It could be political advocacy, it could be economic cooperation, cultural inroads, we talked about it. Find your comfort zone, and most importantly, last but not least, come to Israel as much as you can and bring your friends and bring your family. because I think I generally think it's a miracle. It's just really unbelievable. So I'm working on these 10 commandments, and hopefully I've been thinking about them, and I thought to try it out here. And if you like it, I will write it in written, and I will because these are the things that I've learned to be extremely important to pass to our friends that are pro-Israel advocates. And sometimes, things are important. So I think Menachem Begin said it once, even things that are obvious, they need to be said.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Definitely. And I think those 10 commandments are fantastic. I think that they do a great job for us here in Indiana with what we can do to educate ourselves, how we can be involved in the future, and how we can continue to support Israel in the relationship. So thank you so much for answering all of these questions. It's a fantastic time. I'll turn it back over to the staff.
Hi, thanks everyone. This is Jamie Radner-Rich. Aviv, good to see you. Thank you for the update. Brian, thank you so much for hosting. Never take Israel for granted. Isn't this the year to think about the things where we've taken so much for granted and how lucky we are for all of the things we have in the middle of this pandemic? So I'm here tonight wearing several hats. First and foremost, as the current vice chair of the JCRC, with over 10 years on this board, I have seen a lot of change and wonderful things in our community. And also as an officer of the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis, I'm here tonight. So first, a big thank you in this time where we have learned to appreciate everything in front of us. We want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day. You can be selective with your Zooms. So thank you for being on this one. Thank you for stepping up to calls in the community over the course of this year to financially support all of our constituent organizations who have really been there to support families who have been out of work, times where the elderly have needed rides, needed supplies, children who have needed services. We've all really done an amazing job locking arms, taking care of each other. And we're not over yet. Of course, I'm here to talk to you about campaign. You knew it would come at the end of a call, but we have an amazing opportunity in front of us, once again, that I hope you will all be able to reach out to your friends and family and rise to the call. There's an amazing match opportunity where if our community can raise $120,000, we can receive $60,000 in matching funds for our community right here in Indianapolis to continue doing work against anti-Semitism, feeding families, providing additional assistance to others in the community, teaching Holocaust education, learning about preventing things never again, and really just each challenge, in particular, my passions for racial justice and equity within the community as well. We have lots of thanks to give to all our staff members on both JCRC and the Federation for all the work they've done. You can make contributions today at jewishindianapolis.org/donate, or if you just feel like maybe that's too much tonight, guess what? Tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. So we're going to send you lots of different emails from several of our organizations with easy links on ways that you can support the Federation, Popsy's Pantry, Jewish Community Relations Council, any way, anything that calls to you to support community members that need assistance. But more than anything, we're thankful that you take time to continue learning, to continue supporting, and to continue sharing and teaching others around you more about the issues that we face as a community every day, and for the allies that you've stood next to during the course of this year. So right now I'm going to turn it back over. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to mention, this is a very long, Indianapolis JCRC salsalabs.org Giving Tuesday. It is in the chat, but again, we're going to send you some emails tomorrow. So, and we'll be on Facebook and Instagram and every social media. So thank you so much. And I am going to turn it back over to, I believe, Lindsay to close us out. I hope that's right. And you'll unmute again.
Yes, this time I will unmute. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Consul General Ezra. It's good to see you. it wouldn't be right for us to go 6 or 8 months without a briefing from you or a visit from you. And so we just had to host you virtually. We were starting to have a little bit of withdrawal. So your support and engagement with Jewish communities and non-Jewish communities and institutions and around the state has just been stellar, and it makes such a difference to the work we do on a local level. But we also know that it's improving, you know, the lives of Hoosiers when we can build those bridges between Indiana and Israel, and bring Israel's story into our everyday conversations. So thank you to you and to your wonderful team in Chicago. We will look forward to the day when we can host another pop-up consulate in Indianapolis post-pandemic. Thank you, Amy Ratner-Rich, for your passionate plea and your steady counsel on our board, to Miriam Dant, our chair, to Michelle Bukai, to Brian Hoffman, to everybody on the back end who helped to make tonight possible. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who joined us. We will have a follow-up email in the next 24 hours or so with links to op-eds, to the 10 Commandments, to all sorts of other topics that we talked about tonight. So good evening, Erev Tov. And stay healthy and safe, l'kulam, to everyone.